most forms of leadership, and maybe the forms that are most desperately needed, are forms of leadership that are not coupled to a specific named position. Second, I know that the Lord wants every man in the church, every one of us, to expand our understanding of and our capacity for godly, masculine leadership. And to do that, I asked CJ and Jeff if they would join us this evening for an interview about how to think biblically and theologically about leadership. And they graciously agreed, and so I would like to ask them now to come join me on stage so that we can have a conversation about leadership.
That was not leadership. That was
yes, it was leadership.
Selfishness.
That was leadership.
Taking your
If
place.
people are paying attention, that was leadership. We're talking about me taking this seat. He was going for this seat. There was no way I was going to allow him to take this seat because that's the seat he should have for this interview. Yeah.
As you can see, I am up against a leadership challenge. Pray for me.
The individual with the least to say should sit the farthest away. Yeah.
Sounds like you have the most to say.
I could work with that too. Yes.
Okay, thank you both for being here tonight. We're all very grateful that you are here, and I'm gonna try to move this along. First, I know that you have both thought a lot about leaders and about leadership. You both are leaders. You have studied leaders. You have studied leadership. You have trained leaders. So you have a lot of experience with this topic, and we want to draw on your wisdom. We want to learn all you can. So I want to begin with this question. Leadership, it's one of those words that you know it when you see it, but it can be elusive. It can be hard to define. It's not a word that occurs very many times in the Bible, and so there are many people who have tried to fill in gaps with business leadership, lessons from politicians and generals and everybody else. So can you help us think biblically about how to define leadership? What is it?
I'm sure he can.
Well, I mean, you make a great point. I mean, leadership is one of those things that kind of takes on, especially in our culture, takes on a life of its own. It's assumed this massive place in business. It's assumed this massive place on the shelves of Barnes and Noble. But like you said, Steve, it's not one of those things that is a topic that the Bible covers explicitly. It's rare. I think there's maybe one text that comes to mind where I think, okay, now it's talking about leadership, but it's just assumed everywhere. It's specialized courses in business schools or in university settings. If you think about leadership books, just cottage industry that rolls off, and if you read these, I used to read these, I don't read too many anymore, because they tend to say the same things. Sometimes you get a takeaway.
Just a different metaphor is used.
And not that they can't be useful, if there's not some common grace in them. Christian leadership books tend to just take from those books sometimes and transfer it. Tends to be pragmatic. And sometimes at its worst, it takes sort of secular principles and sort of sticks a Bible verse on it and kind of baptizes it in sort of Christian language. So, but I think that shows, the other thing about all those books is they keep coming like every month, which means no one figures it out. It's not like, finally, I got the leadership book. No, you always need it. It's like drugs. You always need another hit. You know, it's like, wow, I've read this, I've mastered it, and now, okay, another leadership book. It's you'd think you would arrive at some point.
No, of the making and publishing of leadership books, there appears to be no end.
Exactly.
Except so few are theologically informed.
That's right. So and that's not to criticize people writing those books. And again, there can be a lot of helpful wisdom, a lot of pragmatic wisdom. But I do think it shows how elusive the topic is, particularly because the Bible doesn't hone in on, okay, let's explore leadership. Like you said, we see leadership in action. We see tons of leaders, right? Kings and prophets and priests and pastors and apostles, and so we sort of see it on display. You see sort of good results of good leadership and harmful results of bad leadership.
Yep.
So I was grateful to think about this a little bit. And as I started, and Steve had asked us these questions earlier, and as I started trying to think about this, I didn't go to my bookshelf. I just thought, all right, trying to think biblically, trying to think synthetically, drawing together different strands of what Scripture says, and also functionally, what does it look like? And also foundationally. In other words, it applies to everyone, every person in a leadership position, not just someone with a role, not just someone with a title. So here's an attempt. I wrote it down here. It's an attempt. It's provisional. Maybe we can explore it, critique it, tear it up, whatever. So what's leadership? And I think in this context, we want to think about Christian leadership. So this is what I wrote down. Christian leadership, a compelling personal example combined with a posture of intentional initiative toward a God-honoring goal for the good of others. Right, so that's a shot.
Yeah, read it a few times.
A compelling personal example combined with a posture of intentional initiative.
Stop.
I'll give it to you if you want.
Intentional initiative. Continue.
Toward a God-honoring goal for the good of others.
Excellent.
So that's a start. Now, can I unpack that maybe a bit?
Yeah.
So it begins with personal example, compelling personal example. So leadership's not just a function, it's not just a role, but it's who we are. It flows from who we are. We don't. So I think as leaders, biblically speaking, we're not just directing activities, but we are embodying something. We embody something that itself exerts an influence. I mean, when I think about leaders who have influenced me, leaders who I want to follow, that's part of it. They embody. There's an integrity to their lives. There's and an embodiment of where we're heading. And that word I jotted down, compelling. I think that's important to lead effectively. Our personal example needs to carry weight. It needs to represent values that themselves are compelling, that are attractive, that elicit responsiveness from others. And I'm sure we've all, had experienced leadership. We know leaders. We respected those who we wanted to follow, those who we wanted to emulate. I mean, absent that example, and then think on the other side, absent that example, there's no followership.
Nope.
There's not effective leadership. So that personal example becomes just so, and that gets, I see so many younger guys here, that gets real important when we start thinking about cultivating leadership and kind of where we're headed. So personal example, and then with that example, I use the word posture, because leadership is not just actions, but a frame of mind, a way of thinking. I'm oriented in a particular direction. So I'm not just leading when I'm talking, when I'm barking orders, when I'm instructing. I want to think as a leader. I want to be postured as a leader. I want to have that a way of thinking. I'm oriented in a direction. And then that direction, that posture, that mindset is one of intentional initiative. To me, so much of leadership just involves intentionality. It's
Yep.
purposeful.
Yep.
If I'm a leader, and you know this when you see it, and you see when you're weak in it, when you're put in a position where you have to lead, then all of a sudden you just shift into a different gear. It's like, oh no, I got to be thinking. What are we supposed to be doing here? You know, all of a sudden, you know, but as a leader, to grow as a leader, I want to be thinking that way all the time. I don't have the luxury of passivity. I don't want to be sitting around waiting for someone else to come up with ideas or waiting for someone else to move us forward. I want to be thinking about where we're going. And I think I came late to this, but with my marriage, that's where I came to. It's like with my wife, I want to be, I'm not just, I get together with my wife, it's date night to go out, so what are we going to do? I don't know. No, I want to be thinking, where are we going? We have children. Where are we going as a family? I don't have I'm not going to sit around, kids, what do we want to do with our lives? I want to be thinking, no, there is a place we're going, and I want to be instrumental in getting us to that place. So with my family, with the people who work for me, with the group that I'm a part of. And with this, I use the word initiative. I'm wanting in an appropriate way, given my role, given my responsibility, to be thinking, what can I do to serve others? What can I do, especially to serve the purpose that we're together for, whether it's my marriage, or whether it's my family, or whether it's my classroom that I'm a part of, or whatever. And that gets to the last point, or to the last part, toward a God-honoring goal. So there's a goal in mind. Leadership is not just action, it's not just activity. I'm clear, I want to be clear that we as a unit, this family, this group, this church, this group of friends, we have an end in view. Yes. And it's a God-honoring end. Yes. That's what makes it Christian leadership. There's always going to be, I think, a directional component to Christian leadership. We're moving somewhere. We talk about this, even when we talk about preaching, I'll use this image of, we're not just dispensing information. We're wanting to move. We're moving lives. We're moving a congregation.
Yes.
We're moving, and that's why. I mean, we'll say to guys in the pastors' college, and I'm not. This isn't about preaching, but your preaching is the most. It's the strongest, the most explicit exercise of your leadership, because you're using the Word of God to help move the people of God in the direction of the glory of God, essentially. So there's a directional aspect to this, regardless of the position I hold. I am not authoritative. We don't set our own course. Maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but all authority comes from above, right? And that gets expressed in my family, that gets expressed in my business. I don't have a course. I don't have a vision. Or if I do, it's derived from the vision I've been given for God. So that's why it's a God-honoring goal. And then finally, for the good of others. And I added that because I thought, well, you can have a God-honoring goal, or you think it's a God-honoring goal, but you can just steamroll everyone else while you're trying to lead ostensibly to this God-honoring goal. No, it's for the good of others. I guess this helps keep it God-honoring. But I think it helps ensure that it is. It really, I think a leader has in mind, well, that's an obvious statement, he should have in mind the good of others. Yep. We're not using people toward a goal, even a God-honoring goal. Yep. Like Paul says, when he thinks he's pretty sure he's going to be released from prison, in Rome, Philippians 1, and he said, no, it's going to be better for me to remain, better to be with Christ, but for you, it's better to remain and continue. Then he says, for your progress and joy in the faith.
Yep.
So he just existed to move these people forward. He existed, not this abstraction of the glory of God. He existed to serve these people, to help these people. So that's how I sort of summed it up in my mind.
Well, so first of all, you've seen this definition on display in how Steve has led the entirety of this evening.
Amen.
So, compelling personal example, not a flawless example, but a genuine example. I want to make sure I have it right. A compelling personal example combined with a posture of intentional initiative, right? Like, yesterday we had a brief call where Steve was preparing us for the meeting and planning the meeting with Jeff and I. And so at the outset, Jeff informed us that he jotted down this definition. Just jotted it down. Hey guys, I just jotted this down. And I think that's the finest definition of leadership I've read, jotted down or otherwise. So it's a bit frightening to me
You need to read a bit more,
that's just jotted down. If you could see what I jot down, you would not be impressed with that. And so I went into my library and looked at my whole section on leadership, and there wasn't one book that I would presently recommend on the topic. I then went into my files, pulled out my folder on leadership, and it was laughable what was present in there. So I was communicating to both of you, I got nothing on this. But I was so glad to hear Jeff's definition, which I'm already benefiting from. You've seen that in the example of Steve and the initiative and the planning that he has taken. So there is a desperate need for a robust theology of leadership. What recommendations would you two men have for how we can form that and cultivate that and apply that?
Well, I think I begin with Jesus. No, but there. If you think about,
Let me get this
joke, but it's
down.
not a joke.
Hold on.
But I mean, if we want a theology of leadership,
I do.
hopefully that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going to unpack it here, but
Yeah.
what we just said, I think, leads us in that way.
Yes.
I mean, where you'd start is Genesis chapter 1, and but this gets to authority coming from above. So when God created man in his image, he gives them the creation mandate to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it. So he's receiving a mandate from God, so it's not self-generated. But he's called to do, there's a direction. He's not simply enjoying fellowship with God in the garden, although that's the highest privilege that he has, but flowing from that fellowship that he has, he becomes a worker. He becomes a vice regent of God,
Yep.
fulfilling the purposes of God. Hence that God-honoring goal. We're not just, a leader is moving in a particular direction. So
you can't overstate the importance of Genesis
no,
1, 2, and 3.
And then when you go
comes
through,
to
then we go
theology
fast
of
forward through the
leadership.
Old Testament, and again, I think hopefully we're touching base with that some of what's in that definition. That authority derived from God, we are in a sense mediating God's own rule to creation, and then so if you think about kings in the kingdom of Israel, they were not to be like ancient Near Eastern tyrants. They were mediating the care of God. They were to, what were they told in Deuteronomy? Write out for yourself a copy of the law. So that's going to determine how you lead. And then you're not to accumulate all this stuff. You're not self-serving, but you're serving the other people. Excellent. Prophets, priests, doing similar things, different kinds of leadership. But they were all mediating God's own care for his people. But it's directed for the good of others. So it's directed for the people. They're not just kind of worshiping God in the abstract. And then, of course, you get to Christ. And we're going to get to this, I'm sure, because one of Steve's questions has to do with servant leadership. But that's probably the one place where the topic that I can think of, where the topic is leadership, Mark chapter 10.
Yep.
James and John come. We want you to do for us whatever we ask. Sure. What do you want? And we want to sit on your right hand and your left. And then it's not given to you. And then, of course, he goes, all right, let's sit down. And then he says, and so it's a leadership context. The Gentiles lord it over others. That's how they lead. They use their power to exploit. They use their power to benefit themselves. They use their power to domineer. Not so with you. If you're going to be first, must be last. If you're going to be greatest, must be the servant of all. Yeah. And so that's the leadership teaching in the Bible. Yep. In terms of the topic is leadership. I think that's it. One of them. Yep. And so that gets to the whole topic of servant leadership. But the other thing, and another text that comes to mind, though, we think so much of servant leadership, and that's worthwhile. But I think there's also not just servant leadership, but shepherd leadership. And if you think of one of the high points of Christology in the New Testament, I think of Philippians chapter 2, of course, that is there not as a in-depth Christological seminar, but it's there to be used as an illustration for how we interact with others. So Paul says, have this attitude that was in Christ, who, though being in the form of God, did not count equality with God something to be grasped or something to be used for his own advantage, but emptied himself, taking on the appearance of a man. Then he humbled himself to the point of death, even death on a cross. Have that attitude. So that really infuses servant leadership with like power, because it's not just servant leadership like I'm just a servant, but no, it's shepherd leadership. No, I'm taking the hit. I'm willing to deny myself. I'm going to be first. And if you're going to lead in any context, you're going to get criticized, and you're going to get opposed, and you're going to get dumped on. You're going to be the target for opprobrium, and so. But that's what Jesus did, and we're supposed to have that attitude in ourselves. So I want to do that with my wife. I know I'm taking the hits here. If anyone's going to work hard, I'm going to work hard. If anyone has a sacrifice, I'm going to sacrifice. Except my wife outworks anyone that I know. But I'm going to try to keep up. But I want to do that. I want to do that for my kids. I want to do that I want to have that attitude, because I didn't grasp ease. Jesus didn't come to exercise all the prerogatives of what he really deserved. He gave those up, and so I want to do that. So those are some of you said a theology of leadership. Well, those are, I think, some threads, some threads of it. Mediating God's care for his people, doing it not for our own self-aggrandizement, not for our own benefit, but for the good of others, and doing it in a way that is self-sacrificial for the good of others and for the glory of God. I don't know.
How would you answer?
How would I answer? Well, thanks for asking. I think the definition, I love this definition, and at the heart of this is this phrase, intentional initiative.
Yep.
And I think, especially for younger men, I think to flip that switch, to learn to go around and to develop eyes to see what does it mean to be intentional, and what does it mean to take initiative. And sometimes that can be reduced to very simple things like your wife or your mom is cooking and you see, oh, the trash is about to overflow, I'm gonna take the trash out. That's good, that's training wheels for intentional initiative. But I feel like that phrase, like getting hold of that phrase of intentional initiative and beginning to carry that around as a way of life, not just a thing that I switch on when I'm in the meeting at work, or I've got this responsibility at school for my hall or something like that. I got to lead a Bible study, but it's a way of life. And in every conversation, every interaction, how can I be intentional and how can I take initiative? And I think sometimes it helps bring that to light to clarify what that is by thinking about what would the absence of those two things be. If I'm unintentional, then I'm just aimless. And if I'm not taking initiative, then I'm just, what would the opposite of that be? I'm just bumping along. And that sort of aimless failure to act. One author I read not long ago said, he just put it very simply, he said, act, don't react. And I thought, that's a great, concise way to say it. So how can I, in every relationship, in every setting I'm in a conversation with somebody after church, thinking, is there any way that I can exercise leadership here? Gentle, serving leadership. Can I pray for this person? Can I introduce this person to somebody or get them involved in a community group? Or what can I do? So I think that phrase, I think to try to answer your question about how can we learn this, and I want to be quick to confess, that's been a labor for me. That's hard. I feel like this is a circuit breaker that's overloaded. If you ever stood in front of a circuit breaker and you flip that thing and it hums for a minute and then it just flips back, like, oh gosh, I forgot to do it. Okay, I got to do that again. I keep trying to flip this thing back on. And I think it's a task that it's a learned skill, and it's a skill that we can help one another in, and it's especially a skill that younger men really benefit from older men in seeing even what are the opportunities to do this.
Yeah. No, agree.
That's so true.
Take this definition with you into your week, into whatever context. I mean, Jeff, thank you for jotting this down, because this is a definition that can get some serious work done in all of our lives if we contemplate it, and I would encourage you to memorize it, and most importantly, to apply it. Every situation is just pregnant with possibilities if we have a theology of leadership. And I love those two words in particular, intentional initiative. Yes, there are certain contexts where we are to be observing, listening, learning, but the majority of contexts, intentional initiative is applicable, appropriate to the context. So this can make an immediate difference in your life for the glory of God.
Yeah, I think that's really true, and I think this would be a great phrase to discuss.
Yep.
To think, am I taking intentional initiative, or am I being blindly passive, floating through life, being run by others? I want to come back to the servant leadership category. That was the second question I wanted to talk about. In Mark's gospel, you mentioned this, Jesus said, if anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And so many people assume, okay, therefore all leadership must be servant leadership. Read an article by another author not long ago. He said there is a danger in that we might get ourselves into a point where we think of all servant, no leadership. That servant leadership begins to drift that direction. And so how should we think rightly about the word servant in the phrase servant leadership? And how do we keep that in proper perspective?
I'm saying you two guys are smarter than I am.
I invited you two here. I invited you two.
Let me
you
just
have to answer stuff too.
Let me just model intentional initiative right here.
It was my intentional initiative first.
You two guys are smarter than I am, so you should answer before I do. My job here tonight is basically to just be a living illustration of leadership for these men. I'm an embodiment of it as I sit here, and I best serve them by just allowing them to observe me. No, you
And I'm different now. Just watching you, I'm just different. Now, I would say though, and
yeah.
we could maybe put this on pause depending on how he responds. But I had been, little bio, I had been in, after I graduated from college, I had been in the banking industry, in the corporate world, corporate banking. And I had led in a number of different settings, and but then 9 years later, 10 years later, I went to seminary. And I had been in study mode for 3 years, I mean, in really study mode. And I worked, but I was overloaded my classes and took everything that I could. And then I came, I got an intern, we ended up, our paths crossed. I needed to do an internship to finish my program, came to your church that you were leading, Covenant Life Church, and
our paths didn't cross. I came to recruit you.
You came to Chicago. Yes, you did. Intentional initiative.
That's exactly right.
But yeah, I've been in seminary, and I know that a number of you have been, but I was in seminary for 3 years, and I had a fantastic seminary experience. I really did, like the best you could have had. But it was a seminary experience. It only does so much. And then I joined this pastoral team, and all of a sudden and this church that I was part of, that you were leading, I'd never been in a church like it in my life. I mean, it was like a 12-cylinder Jaguar engine. It was just like everything was popping. I mean, there was rock solid expositional preaching and passionate worship and relationships and evangelism, and I mean, this thing was just going. And I was like, whoa! I didn't see this in seminary at all. And but I was embraced, became part of this pastoral team. But one of the things that most struck me, it was this. I mean, it wasn't spoken this way, but it was the intentionality of the leadership of the church. And you were the senior pastor. I learned intentionality, and it is like a switch. I had been in sort of cerebral mode for a few years, and it was a paradigm shift for me. No, I need to be thinking not like a scholar or a student. I need to be thinking like a leader. I need to be thinking like a pastor. And it was there was some muscle memory that had to be developed. So talk about that a little bit. I mean, to me, you embodied that to me in a way I had rarely seen. I have a few examples, but I think for you, with you, it really came alive.
What's the question? So
just talk about the way you think about intentionality. Just go through just the way you live life. You start your day, you start your week.
First of all, you need a theology of leadership. So you need to have that as a conviction, not just a preference. It can't just be something intuitive. It needs to be theologically formed in your heart. And so whatever context you find yourself in, it is informed by leadership as it's described in Scripture, and I think encapsulated wonderful in the definition that you have given there. So my challenge in answering your question is, I'm aware that other people observe this in my life, but I've never taught on this. And I'm not exactly sure how I've learned this. And so that was part of the challenge of agreeing to do this interview, was that this is like when people come to me and say, you're a great athlete. How did you become a great athlete?
They would never say that. Let's use a more realistic.
They say it all the time.
Let's use a more realistic
They say
example.
it all the time, and I just have to respond and just say, I can't teach you that. it's a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not working.
So you two would be better positioned to tell me what you observe about intentional leadership.
Well, that was not my question.
Okay.
I didn't ask you to give me a
well, then your
theology
question
of
wasn't clear. Your
intentionality.
question, I couldn't even find the question.
Talk about what you do. Talk
I was
about
looking
how you
for the question, but you kept talking, and I couldn't find the question. But you said a number of good
This
things.
is our pastoral team right here, and it's a blast.
What is the question?
Talk about how you enter your week.
You enter your week, or I enter my week aware of my God-given roles, aware that one day I will give an account. I will give an account as a Christian. I will give an account as a husband. I will give an account as a father. I will give an account as a grandfather. I will now give an account as a great-grandfather. I will give an account as a pastor. So those are the roles that I have been called to serve and fulfill. And so at the beginning of the week, the purpose of the week is how can I apply those roles with a heart to serve everybody within the context of those roles. And so there's intentional planning that takes place at the outset of each and every week so that I can fulfill those roles in some way, serve those I love the most and am called to serve. It's a simple practice that usually takes about 30 minutes for me, Sunday, late afternoon or early Monday morning. So yeah, I'm never just drifting into my week. I'm never just waiting to see what emerges. No, I have certain roles, I have certain responsibilities. Therefore, how can I set goals for each and every week in the fulfillment of those roles? And I find that kind of intentional planning is fruitful. And if I don't plan in that way, well, then the urgent will overtake the important in my life. And I can be very busy on a given day, but not devoted to doing that which is most important. So I will lie in bed at the end of the day with a certain low-grade guilt that though I accomplished many tasks, I neglected that which was most important. So if one isn't intentional, one will be distracted by that which is of less importance. One will be beholden to those who have a wonderful plan for your life. One will not know how to say no to the many demands. We should all go into every day and every week knowing that there's no way to fulfill all the requests others would have of us. So if you aren't prepared and informed by your God-given roles, then you won't be in a position to take the kind of initiative, intentional initiative you should, and you won't be in a position to decline where someone wants you to invest your life, but it's actually not in line with your God-given roles.
Okay, so that's excellent. What I love about that is it shows it's intentional, meaning it takes work.
Yep.
Now, you can develop that, I think, that habit, but you don't just go into your week, what's happening today? You're intentional. You position yourself to then be purposeful, and you position yourself to take initiative.
Yep.
So I just think that is just vital. I think that's why Jesus said, I only do my Father's will. I do not do my will. He's up in the morning. He's praying. He's going in his day.
Yep.
Intentional. He's going to do the will of the Father. He's not just sort of floating along on, which person comes to him that day to heal or whatever. So I'm glad. That's what I wanted to hear you say, because I think that's one of the ways you cultivate leadership is you plan, you're intentional in your planning so that you can take initiative.
Yep.
You plan something. This is coming up on Wednesday. My wife just had a 65th birthday, and I'm not claiming to be excelling in this, but I knew that was coming. And what I wanted to do for her took weeks to plan. And it would have been very easy, and I've done this thing before with her birthday, to just, oh, wow, it's like tomorrow. I didn't in this instance and so forth, but it just took intentionality so that then I could take appropriate initiative. Anyway, thank you. You're a fantastic example.
Well, I want to say about that, what you described, this process of each week setting aside time to evaluate your week, to plan, to look ahead, to think about your roles and those goals. For some of you, that might be a new idea, or maybe you've come across that in productivity books or something like that, but maybe it seemed elusive or hard to put into practice. I want you to know that CJ has a booklet that he wrote called Biblical Productivity. It originated as a series of blog posts that was assembled into a booklet. We have it available as a PDF, and so I will arrange for Amanda to send it to everybody, to send it to, I guess, the whole church. And if you are our guest and you want to get a hold of that, but you're not on our normal church mailing list, see me after, or just give your email to a friend here to pass on to me, and I'll make sure that you get that as well. I want to ask a follow-up question on this, because I think that's so good at a big macro level about how to be intentional and how to take initiative. The other thing I've seen about you, CJ, is that you do this really, really well on a very micro personal level too. Your intentional initiative takes place with individuals. I think you listen to people better than anybody I know. I think that you are always very attentive to what they're saying. And you have this discernment because you listen so carefully. It's like you're always asking yourself, all right, what does this person need, or how can I help them move forward? And you are so wise in providing counsel to people, so discerning in helping emerging leaders discern what is God's call for their life and where should they go with ministry. Or sometimes it's just as simple as like, how can I pray for you? Or identifying, hey, it seems like the Lord's at work in your life in this way. How do you do that on a personal level, exercising that intentional initiative in conversation?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to be aware those you are interacting with, particularly in the context of the church, are those for whom Christ died. So I'm not a professional pastor. I have been temporarily entrusted with those for whom he died, and informed by Mark 10, which I would agree with Jeff. I was going to actually ask you, it seems like in the Gospels that's the only explicit place where Jesus is explicitly talking about leadership and contrasting the common form of leadership in the Gentile world at that time with the distinctive form of servant leadership that he wanted to characterize. So he's got, here are the 12, their relationship is fracturing as he's making his way to Jerusalem to die on the cross. They're arguing over who is the greatest among them. This is the future leadership of the church. And then, James and John, it can appear as if they take advantage. So that's chapter 10. Chapter 9, Peter has the bad day at the Mount of Transfiguration. So I don't know if James and John saw an opening to approach Jesus without Peter and ask to sit. They've seen the glory, now they want to sit on the right hand and the left. So that understanding of Jesus' definition of true greatness as the servant of all is what must inform all our intentionality. So I think until we immerse ourselves in a passage like that, we won't look up from our Bibles and around a room on a Sunday and just realize the opportunities that are everywhere we look and take advantage of those opportunities. So, I don't think there's anything complicated about this or profound. It's having a heart for those he died for, or in the case of the lost, having a heart for those one wants to evangelize and share the good news with at some point. How can we intentionally take an interest in them, draw them out, find out? You can just always know this as you're approaching somebody. Something is burdening them. That doesn't mean they're going to divulge it to you, because that divulging can't be required. But over a period of time, as they become convinced you sincerely care, the divulging of that burden will take place. So one of the reasons Sunday is the best day of the week is the church being gathered to celebrate the risen Christ of the cross. The opportunities to be intentional and to take intentional initiative. They're at the community group level as well. Every guy here who is participating in a community group should be very intentional in taking intentional initiative toward whoever's leading the group. If you're in a community group, you want to ask the leader of that group, how can I serve? What can I do? How can I pray for what's taking place? What do you got planned? How can I contribute in some particular way? But minimally, what you can do is be reaching out to everybody who's there. And so a call to lead for a man means that in whatever context, I'm not just passively observing. I am intentionally pursuing people and seeking to care for them. So I think that's the answer to your question. Or what you
And to that, to go back to that question about servant leadership, and it can sometimes be, I think if you understand the context of Mark 10, we rip it out of its context and we think, well, leadership is just serving, so I'm just going to serve. I'm not going to take initiative. I'm not seeking to move things forward. I'm just serving. He was talking to the disciples. He was talking to the apostles. He was talking to the future leaders of the church. He wasn't dumbing down their job description. Just make sure you're behind the scenes, taking care of little details. What he's saying there is, it's not about you. You're living for something bigger. You're living for God and the good of others. And in fact, you of all people must be the last of all. You of all people must sacrifice. You of all people must live for something else. So that's and of course Jesus, the one saying it, is the consummate example of servanthood. And what I was saying a moment ago about shepherd leadership, what servanthood meant for him was laying his life down. What servanthood meant for him is denying himself. And so that's what true servant leadership is. It's not I'm not really going to lead because I just want to be a servant. It's no, I want to lead in all of my initiative and all of my seeking to care for others and all my seeking to move myself and those that I'm with forward in God-honoring purposes. I'm doing it for Christ, and I'm doing it for their good, and I'm doing it. It doesn't matter what happens to me. In fact, I'm going to sacrifice myself for it. So that's what that's what that adjective means in servant leadership. So it seems.
Very helpful. Okay, so I'm not sure what to do here because we've been talking almost an hour. I have 6 more questions, and I don't think we can do that and give these guys time to discuss.
No, give them time.
So can we do this again sometime and continue talking about leadership with these guys? Would you come back and do this again, is what I'm asking.
He will come back. Yes. Yes.
Would you guys like CJ to come back too?
Oh,
there we go.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll work it out.